Okay, so I think we're going to start with this session. It's great pleasure to introduce Professor Roula Inglesi Lotz. Forgive me, my pronunciation perhaps is not the way it's...
It was perfect. Perfect.
Oh, okay. Well, Roula, you know, this workshop gravitates around energy issues, energy poverty, energy markets, energy uncertainty. And Professor Roula has a lot to say on these topics. She has an outstanding and remarkable large publication record precisely in these topics. If you look at her production record, you may infer that she's a very authorized voice to address today's challenges in energy markets and challenges regarding energy uncertainty, energy transformation, and the adoption of renewable energies. I went through her works. There are so many topics covered. Just to cite a few, her notable works include the exploration of the role of renewable energy in reducing CO emissions in Sub-Saharan Africa, investigations about the impact of economic structures on the environmental cost curve, something we were discussing yesterday precisely. She has also analyzed the nexus between electricity consumption, economic growth, CO emissions, particularly in BRICS countries. And she has also contributed to the understanding of energy poverty, one of the key topics in this workshop, and its implications for economic development. So, Roula, thank you for being here, for sharing your time and sharing your research with us. Thank you, and the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, and thank you for the very, very generous introduction. So I'm trying to speak Spanish, but I'm not going to try today. I'm going to keep it for maybe when we meet in person. Hopefully we'll make a plan for next year. Thank you very much for the invitation. It's a pleasure to connect with you and the work you're doing, even online. And I'm very happy to present some of the work we are doing in our team with regards to energy poverty. I will give more information about our research as I'm talking. And also to let you know that the second part of the presentation will be done by my colleague and PhD student in our team, Ms. WiZelle Kritzinger. So you'll see how we have tried to put together the narrative and present some of our results. But let me begin a little bit by grounding us in the core message of this presentation. Across Sub-Saharan Africa, we see countries growing. The GDP is rising, investment is increasing, and yet, if you look at the statistics, millions of households remain energy poor. This disconnect between growth and well-being is the puzzle. Let's think of it as a puzzle. We try to unpack in this talk. Our argument is that economic growth alone does not guarantee that people gain access to clean, reliable, and affordable energy. And we try to think that something stands between economic resources and living conditions, lived outcomes. And that's something we argue in this part of our work. That something is institutional quality. It's that big C, we say, it's the corruption. So today I'm taking you on a journey beyond growth into the institutional mechanisms that determine whether growth can actually reduce energy poverty. And as I said earlier, this is joint work with my colleague, and this work forms part of the broader agenda of our chair in Just Energy Transition, where we examine not only the what question of energy transitions, but also the why and the how and what's the consequences. Especially lately, our research on inequalities. Let's look at the next slide. So I want to start a little bit by bringing you briefly into our world, the context from which the research emerges. On the left, you see Africa at night. And this image always strikes me, except for the fact that, yes, the top part is the Sahara Desert, so we wouldn't expect lights there. But the darkness in the rest of the continent is not just the absence of light. It's the absence of opportunity, the absence of choice, the absence of services. And this kind of absence, many of us, I come originally from Greece. I've been in South Africa for almost 20 years now, but I grew up and I did my undergraduate studies in Greece. Many of us take all of these things for granted. This darkness tells a story on its own. It's a story of uneven development, of structural barriers, of energy access deeply shaping people's lives. And it's this lived reality that motivates our work. On the right-hand side, my favorite pictures is from our campus at the University of Pretoria. You see something a little bit different. It's the University of Pretoria in Jacaranda. This is the famous purple trees, the Jacaranda trees in Pretoria. They are iconic in our city, and they bloom every October. They signal the beauty of the environment and the energy of the academic community. So it is in this environment that our team of Just Energy Transition operates. So how do this why did I choose this type of images to start my thought process sharing with you? Is on the one side, the darkness symbolizes the energy challenges of our continent, but on the other side, the academic home from which we contribute to solutions. So it's a dual perspective that shapes our work. On the one side, Africa's realities, and on the other side, guided by the responsibilities that we researchers have to generate evidence, ask difficult questions, and support a transition that leaves no one behind. In the next slide, when we talk about energy poverty, it's easy to think of it narrowly, just as a matter of electricity access. But this image here, where we try to connect all of these things, captures why energy poverty is far more than that. At the center, we intentionally put SDG 7, since we do research on energy, which is the goal to affordable and clean energy. But look at the web of connections around it. Energy is linked, it's entangled with almost every other sustainable development goal. If a household has no clean cooking, SDG 3, good health, is affected. If children cannot study at night, SDG 4, quality education, is compromised. If families spend hours collecting firewood, which is the case in the African continent and other developing countries, SDG 5, gender equality, is impacted because it is, from evidence we have seen, it's overwhelmingly women and girls who bear that burden. Without electricity, in many cases, reliable electricity, and not only access, SDG 8, decent work, becomes a dream. So perhaps, and most importantly for today's conversation and talk, SDG 16, strong institutions, sits right there in the network, because none of these goals can be achieved without institutions that deliver reliable services fairly, transparently, and efficiently. So the way we define energy poverty here, I will discuss on that later on, fits perfectly into this picture. It's not only access. Energy poverty is not only a technical problem. It's a development problem. It is a justice problem. It is an institutional problem. This is why the role of corruption becomes so important, and we bring it in the middle of the discussion. Without strong institutions, without strong governance, the entire SDG network begins to weaken, and energy poverty persists, and therefore economies cannot grow. When we speak in the next slide about energy poverty, we often imagine a single universal experience. But in reality, definitions vary enormously from country to country, from region to region, and for a good reason. The OECD reports remind us that what counts as energy poverty is, in one part of the world, may look completely different in another. So you see here on the left, an example from Europe. This woman technically has electricity, she has a heater, but she may be unable to afford to run it long enough to meaningfully heat her home. On the other side, we see a very different reality where the issue is not affordability, but basic access. A child studying with a candle or a small lantern because there simply is no grid connection available. And these two images illustrate an important point. Energy poverty is not one problem. It is many problems, and they differ across contexts. So suggesting one solution is not going to help reducing energy poverty in all contexts. What it means to be energy poor depends deeply on climate. It depends on infrastructure. It depends on income, like I said, on governance in the region and availability of basic services. So one-size-fits solutions fail. We need to start understanding the multidimensional nature of energy poverty and why it is so critical for policy design. In the next slide, I'm talking about I'm bringing in a few statistics to pause a little bit on the European side before I explain a little bit more on focus on Sub-Saharan Africa. Energy poverty is not only a problem over there anymore. In the last 10 years, the literature has moved from that. Energy poverty is not only a problem of the global south. It is a structural issue, appears even in most advanced high-income regions. It just has a different face. The numbers here in 2021, nearly 7% of Europeans could not keep their homes adequately warm. By 2022, that rose to over 9%. And in 2023, especially, I think, connected with the price shocks and the impacts of the conflict, the Russia's war in Ukraine, it crossed 10%. For a continent with almost universal electrification, that is a striking figure, and it shows we're not talking about access problems here. The map on the right shows this divide also clearly. Southern and Eastern European countries especially experience much higher rates of energy poverty, and in some cases above 20%. And there are households with electricity, access to electricity connected to the grid, but without the ability to afford enough energy to live with dignity and comfort. And I think Spain and Portugal, with the recent blackouts, also join us in South Africa in understanding that access to the grid and being connected to the grid doesn't mean having electricity at home. Why am I showing you this? It helps us frame energy poverty again correctly, not simply about access, not only a low-income country issue, deeply tied to systems, governance, structural inequalities, not only globally, but also within regions. If you see here in Europe, there's also a division between European North and European South. In the next slide, now we begin to zoom into the global picture, and the story looks on the surface encouraging. Over the past 25 years, the number of people with access to electricity has been rising steadily, shown by the blue area, as you see. At the same time, the number of people without electricity, the red area at the bottom, has been shrinking. So substantial global progress. It's obvious through the years. And this is the important insight now. Even with this progress, hundreds of millions of people remain completely without electricity. Not intermittent supply, not unaffordable tariffs, with no access at all. We're talking about millions of people in the red line at the bottom of the graph. The slightly upward trend in the total world population means that gains in electrification must continually outpace demographic growth. So we can't say we've reached the 3 billion or 8 billion people with access to electricity, because there is population growth globally. And we need to keep that red part of the graph from rising again. So while the world is moving into the right direction, the pace is also uneven. I will show you now the next slide. The global picture, we start thinking about geography. So global picture is good, but let's look at where the important developments have happened. Start at the top, North America, number of people without access to electricity, near zero. Europe and Central Asia, also near zero. So there the problem is not access. Looking at Middle East and North Africa, very low numbers. Latin America and the Caribbean, almost negligible. These regions have, for the most part, solved basic electrification. There is access, there's grid. Then we move to East Asia and Pacific in the middle of the graph. And here we see one of the most dramatic success stories in human development. Between 2000 and 2019, the number of people without electricity dropped sharply, driven by progress in China and Indonesia, Vietnam. Why did this happen? This happened because these countries proceeded with large-scale investment, with strategic planning, with institutional coordination and governance. And also, if you see South Asia, tells a similar story. India alone connected hundreds of millions of people within a decade. It shows that electrification at scale is possible, but it requires coordination, political will, governance capability, resources, and long-term planning. And then at the bottom, we arrive at Sub-Saharan Africa, the only region where the number of people without electricity has remained high, and in some countries has even increased due to population growth that is higher and outpacing electrification efforts. And this is the central challenge we face. Global progress is real, profoundly unequal, and Sub-Saharan Africa carries the heaviest burden of remaining energy poor. So the question is not, is the world improving? The world is improving, for sure. On average, yes, the world is improving. The question is that we are facing with is, why is Sub-Saharan Africa not experiencing the same pace of progress? And what can we do? What are the hurdles that bring us there? If we look at the next slide, we've seen that access alone doesn't tell the full story. This slide helps us unpack what that means in practice. So the paper from Schussler reminds us that energy poverty can be measured in many ways. There are four broad groups of indicators. The first two are subjective. They come straight from people's lived experiences. A household might say, I cannot afford to heat my home adequately. Or social workers might observe conditions that the household does not explicitly report. These indicators matter because they capture feelings of discomfort, insecurity, perceptions of coping, that numbers alone cannot reveal. Household being connected or not cannot reveal this kind of unhappiness, let's put it like that. The third group is more objective, but it's not about income. It includes things like humidity in the house, mold on the walls, indoor air pollution. And these are different physical signs that we look at to see if the situation in a household with regards to their energy conditions is inadequate or sometimes even dangerous. The fourth one that they refer to, the fourth indicator group, is the expenditure-based indicators. These tell us how much of a household's income is spent on energy. So tariffs and prices of energy is one thing, but percentages of energy expenditure on total household expenditure is a different way of measuring affordability. If a family spends an excessive share of their income just to keep the lights on, or to cook, or to be heated, that is also a form of energy poverty. The key message here in this slide that you can take is energy poverty is multidimensional. Households experience energy poverty in a multidimensional ways. So two households can have access, but the one is more poor, let's put it like that, than another one. The complexity is exactly why simple policy approaches fail. We need stronger institutions to diagnose the specifics of energy poverty in the different countries and regions. So, establishing the global context, let's turn to the map that shows the region and where the challenge is most acute, like I showed you the other graph earlier. These three maps tell a consistent story. The electricity access on the top left, the darker the color, the lower the access, so you see where the problem is. Immediately see, concentrated across Sub-Saharan Africa, access remain extremely low, in many countries below 40%. This is not a marginal problem. And my colleague WiZelle has heard me say that many times before, but in my travels in Uganda, I gave a talk at the Makerere Business School in Kampala, and I spoke to them about energy transition and renewables, and I gave a long talk about the positives of this transition, and at the end of the class, a lady raised her hand at the back and she said to me, all good and well, we understand everything, but at the moment I don't have electricity at home, I use paraffin. So what you're saying is technically correct, but at the moment I just want electricity at home. I can't think of how. Talking to this point, the top right, we look at access to clean cooking fuels. And here the situation shows the African continent again. Many countries in this region have less than 10% of the population access to clean fuels for cooking. This means high reliance on firewood, charcoal, biomass. That causes enormous consequences on an individual's health. Deforestation is a big problem, talking about climate. Time poverty is a new focus. If households need to walk to cut wood and bring it back, or carry charcoal from where they can find access to, that means the youth, the kids, the women do not have time to educate themselves, to look for job opportunities, etc. The bottom map shows the share of electricity produced from renewables. And that one is a little bit more, you see, Sub-Saharan Africa doesn't stand out. Many African countries have high renewable shares. It's often because their electricity systems are relying on hydropower, not because they have achieved, let's call it a deliberate energy transition, but because this is the highest resource they have in their availability, and therefore they have connected everything around it. From a renewable supply and energy transition point of view, this is wonderful. They're ahead from many other industrialized countries. However, that makes them also very vulnerable to climate situations. So what do these three maps tell us together? The continent faces a layered energy poverty challenge, and this is the global energy poverty problem is accentuated not because African countries lack ambition, but because there are structural constraints that we need to look at. So in the next graph, two ideas here. The one is they're often assumed, actually, the two variables here are assumed to move to the same direction: income and electricity access. And this scatter plot shows the share of the population with electricity access on the vertical axis and GDP per capita on the horizontal axis. Each dot is a country and each color shows a different region. So the first thing we see is at the very top of the chart. It's the 100% access line. We see countries across Europe, North America, Asia, some small island states, high income, high access, and continuously increasing their income through the years, and the access remains the same. That part of the story is not surprising. But when we look specifically again at Sub-Saharan African countries, the picture becomes more scattered. There are countries clustered around very low GDP on the bottom, and they are the countries that have very low access. Burundi, Malawi, Liberia. But then we also see countries with similar income levels, but very different access outcomes. For example, you see the Benin and Djibouti. They have comparable GDP per capita, very low GDP per capita, but very different access rates. And then we have countries like Botswana, relatively higher income within the region, yet still far below the near universal access achieved in similar income levels in other parts of the world. What does this show us? This shows us that economic growth alone does not guarantee electrification. And there are countries with similar levels of income that can have dramatically different levels of electricity access. What causes what is a discussion. More we produce, the more money we can invest to provide electricity access, or do we need to invest in electricity access to initiate higher economic growth? In the next slide, which I'm not gonna, sorry, these are the questions that I've posed already. So the next slide, I have the definition of energy poverty, and I'm not gonna spend lots of time here because I spoke so far about the access, the affordability, the reliability, where I want you to focus on this definition that is a very inclusive definition of energy poverty, is the two words, sufficient choice. Choice is what transforms energy from a technical input into a human capability. And it's not just whether there is connection in the house, it's whether people can afford to use it, whether the supply is reliable, but all of these things needs to be a choice. If I don't have any other access other than to charcoal, I don't have a choice. Or if I can only afford firewood and nothing else, I don't have the choice. The next slide, again, I'm not going to spend a lot of time in the next few slides because I want you to actually see some of the results of our studies. But what I want you to show here is that for those of you that might have worked on literature related to economic poverty, we're talking about similar ways of dealing with energy poverty measurements and which household is considered poor and which not. So 3 main thresholds here: technological threshold. Does the household have access to the technology that makes modern energy possible or not? Without the technology, everything else becomes irrelevant. The second is a physical threshold. Even if the technology is available, the physical performance of the technology must be adequate. Is the supply reliable? Do I have blackouts? Do I have load shedding? Does the voltage fluctuate and damage my appliances? Is the clean cook stove actually reducing indoor air pollution? So these are physical thresholds that we're looking at. And then we have the economic threshold. I spoke about that. Critical in both high and low income contexts. Households have the technology and the physical supply, but can they afford to use it at the level that supports a decent life? That's where the discussion about energy subsidies come in to assist households with this. Or, for example, looking at these thresholds, in South Africa, we have what we call the free basic electricity system. It was introduced in 2001 with the big electrification programs. And it supports, with free electricity, low-income households up to a level. But now the new discussion is the necessary electricity for a decent life per household per month in 2001 is very different to a household in 2025. So we're looking at these thresholds again. The next slide also takes the literature a little bit and looks at the different indicators and classifies them. So there are single indicators, dashboards, sets of multiple indicators, and then composite indices. So with the single indicators is what we've been discussing until now, looking only at access or only at share of clean cooking, access, etc. The dashboards is when we do combinations of these indicators, and an example is the Sustainable Development Goals indicator. So the SDG 7, for example, has different objectives. Total target, but then different objectives. There's not a discussion of putting them together. We look at them separately, but in a holistic picture. It, of course, needs much more work in collecting data. It needs much more work in understanding the aggregation between the indicators, etc. And then we have the composite indices, trying to put all of this information in one index, which on the one side, it's excellent for ranking purposes, but on the other side, it can be misleading if poorly constructed, because we don't know which of the indicators what's the right word? Leads the exam, not leads, dominates the rankings. But the discussion is in general that we need more than one indicator to measure this, the problem of energy poverty. So in the next slide, also from the literature, that this comes from a classification from a 2012 paper, but there are many papers now that have used this multidimensional energy poverty index to demonstrate that energy poverty is more than just lack of access. Dimensions like cooking and space heating and cooling and appliance ownership is also a problem, mechanical powers. But of course, it's quite important to follow a specific technical framework in order to justify the relative weights between these indicators and understand that in different contexts, the different indicators might not be as important. So for example, in the next slide, there are two papers that have used this MEPI, the Multidimensional Energy Poverty Index, and the one was for Netherlands. The other one was from Mozambique, much more recent papers than the 2012 paper. And these two papers shows that the two countries, even though different, they confirm some similar results, like the large geographical discrepancies within the country. Both countries have reported that. And structural challenges between households in this context that does not allow the households to participate fully in the energy transition for different reasons, but the outcome is the same. So what are the key takeaways? I'll try to summarize in the next slide. First, energy poverty is not one thing. It differs across countries, across regions, across incomes, within cities, within urban and rural environments, and the drivers differ as well. The experience is different and the solutions should differ as well. Second, the trends are mixed. Yes, access is improving. No, affordability is deteriorating. Electricity prices, energy prices are increasing. Third, measurement matters. We have subjective indicators, objective indicators, expenditure data. These things should reveal different parts of the story that, if come together, will make us understand the phenomenon more. But also it should raise, knowing that they exist, that should raise a red flag. If we choose the wrong measure, we will design the wrong policy. And finally, the policy implications. Because energy poverty is multifaceted, policies must also be multi-sectoral. So even within the country, we should look at the differences. We should understand the local realities. And the national strategies are not just about infrastructure, but they can look at reliability and affordability. And in many contexts, especially in sub-Saharan African countries, the safety of the specific energy choice. So next, I'm going to give over to WiZelle.
Hi, everyone. Thank you for allowing me to join today. So now that we've heard what energy poverty is, that it differs between contexts, usually global north versus global south, and how to measure it, one question does remain. Why has this been such a persistent problem, especially within the context of Sub-Saharan Africa? We saw the maps, but the statistic is that 760 million people lack access to electricity worldwide, basic access. 80% of those reside in Sub-Saharan Africa. And regarding clean cooking access, while 29 out of the 48 countries have clean cooking access rates lower than 20%. Whenever I pose this question to people, I get a whole range of answers from, there's a lack of political will, there's a lack of technology, maybe there's, lack of investment and so forth. But when I attend talks, especially talks given by people from the global north, the consensus tends to be that there is enough investment, there is enough economic growth, there are technologies out there, there's enough funds, we just need to use it. But considering that we've consistently emphasized that energy poverty is multidimensional in nature, it does leave you wondering whether something as multidimensional as energy poverty really can be solved by just having enough money. So if we look at GDP per capita across the world, it's unsurprising that Sub-Saharan Africa has some of the lowest levels of GDP per capita. It is known as the poorest region. So asking whether improvements in GDP per capita actually can translate into improvements in energy access is really important. And we asked what would be behind actually helping economic growth improve energy access. So we know the importance of institutions. The Nobel Prize for Economics last year went to people studying the importance of institutions for sustained growth, right? So we focused on institutional quality, and then we focused more on the control of corruption aspect of it. If we just look at the corruption perception index, we see that, corruption isn't just a regional problem, it's a global problem, but definitely Sub-Saharan Africa stands out with some of the highest levels of perceived corruption in the world. So we focus on control of corruption aspect from the world governance indicators. And if you're at all familiar with these indicators, you'll know that there are 6 of them. And you'll know that maybe the literature tends to, use all 6 of these indicators together in studies. We did that. We did a study on institutional quality's impact on energy poverty in the region. But we also found that in this conversation that we have regarding, trying to motivate people to consider more aspects of energy poverty beyond just access to electricity, right? If we start to consider 3, 4, 5 indicators for energy poverty, and we start to consider 6 indicators for institutional quality, it tends to dilute the amount that you can say about your results. So the papers tend to skim over, why they found a negative or a positive association. So we decided to break it down into smaller pieces so that we can go into more detail, and decided to focus on control of corruption because for our sample, if you remember, the worldwide governance indicators range from -2.5 to 2.5. And we standardized that to be between 0 and 1, and where higher levels mean better performance in each indicator. So here we see that control of corruption has the lowest average for our sample, meaning that this is probably the indicator that the region struggles with the most. So according to the literature, economic growth improves energy access by ensuring that governments just have more money in order to expand electricity access, invest in these renewable projects, have enough money for subsidies and so forth. But it also increases household purchasing power, allowing households to make those decisions. As we said from the ready et al. Definition, having a choice is part of the energy poverty conversation. So now households may be able to make the decision to move from traditional cooking fuels that are readily available in their area to cleaner cooking fuels. And then corruption control improves energy access by ensuring that the funds allocated to projects, to subsidies, to programs actually go to those things, that those public services are actually delivered. Then the relationship between control of corruption and growth is twofold in the literature. You have the grease the wheels hypothesis and the sand the wheels hypothesis, where greasing the wheels would mean that sometimes there are inefficient bureaucratic processes, and the bribe that the small firm pays to a bureaucrat means that they can enter the market and provide more competition within the market, right? Which is better for consumers at the end of the day. But on the other hand, you have the sand the wheels, where, you know, the funds that were allocated to projects just don't go to those projects. So you don't expand energy access within your country. And the literature is clear, though, that in the long run, corruption does weaken these growth outcomes, even when you sometimes do have these grease the wheels hypotheses, especially within these settings where you already have weak institutions. So if you don't have, you know, good regulatory quality or government effectiveness and so forth, it won't kick in to help you actually control that corruption. So this all led us to our research question on how corruption control influences the impact of economic growth on energy poverty in Sub-Saharan Africa. We used panel data from 2007 to 2022 for 45 out of the 48 countries in the region. We ran a fixed effects model as a baseline, and then our main estimation is a two-step IVGMM. Now, the literature tended to use a cis-GMM model because we do believe there's this dynamic relationship where previous levels of access to clean cooking, access to electricity, you know, that persists, that matters for current levels. But with cis-GMM, obviously, you can account for endogeneity, heteroscedasticity, and serial correlation, but we had the problem of cross-sectional dependence. And increasingly, the literature in energy poverty is starting to look at IVGMM with Driscoll-Cray standard errors to help account for this cross-sectional dependence. So our IVs here would be, according to the literature, it is the first and second lag of your main regressors. So the first and second lag of economic growth, control of corruption, and our interaction term. And our dependent variable energy poverty is proxied by access to clean cooking fuels, access to electricity, which are common indicators in the literature. But as we saw from the graphs that Prof. Inglesi Lotz presented, you know, the sustainability dimension is starting to become increasingly more important to consider, right? So now we have the renewable energy consumption share as well. And then we create an energy development index from principal component analysis, where we use the access to clean cooking fuels indicator, access to electricity, and renewable energy consumption. We proxy economic growth by GDP per capita as per the literature. And then obviously we have control of corruption, which we got from the worldwide governance indicators. And then lastly, we control for income inequality, urban growth, and foreign direct investment. So for our aggregate results, where we look at all 45 countries, before I go on, I just want to say here that we didn't just run GDP per capita, the interaction and control of corruption. I just took these results out in order to show them for you so that we can focus on the results that matter to the research question instead of bombarding you with a bunch of control variables and so forth. So for the interaction between control of corruption and GDP per capita, we see a positive and significant association with access to clean cooking, access to electricity, and renewable energy consumption. So here we see that, you know, the public funds that were gained from GDP per capita improvements actually go to the projects they were intended to, right? They're less likely to be siphoned off, right? And the literature is also clear that there's this mutually reinforcing dynamic between control of corruption and GDP per capita, where if you have economic growth, that means lower levels of corruption. And if you have high control of corruption, that means higher levels of economic growth as well. then we asked ourselves whether, there's any difference between how countries experience energy poverty based on their income level, right? We have the standard income groups, low income, lower middle income, upper middle, and high income. So there's only one high income country in our sample, namely Seychelles, which we group with the upper middle income group because it only recently upgraded from upper middle to high income. And here we see that, by far, when we plot the average energy development index for each of these groups, the upper middle and high income group by far outpaces, low, middle, and low income countries. And you see the same trend when you graph access to electricity and access to clean cooking. However, for renewable energy consumption, it is that these low-income countries tend to rely more heavily on renewables. So in lower middle and upper middle income countries, they tend to have more natural resources such as coal, oil, and natural gas that they rely on. And so it's cheaper for the low-income countries, especially with renewable prices going down. It's cheaper for these low-income countries to then focus on renewables for their energy consumption. So when we disaggregate the sample, we have the low-income group, where we see that there's a positive association with access to clean cooking and the Energy Development Index. As we mentioned, these levels are so low already for these low-income countries, right? So even just a little bit of improvement in control of corruption and GDP per capita goes a really long way in improving access to clean cooking and energy development overall. And as we said as well, that in these low-income countries, renewable energy consumption is higher. But these countries also tend to have decentralized and more fragmented governments, right? Which makes it really hard for effective renewable energy policies to be made. Then for the lower middle income group, we see a negative association with access to clean cooking, but positive for access to electricity. In lower middle income countries, the literature states that, these countries tend to struggle with shifting from traditional fuels, and government and development partners tend to prioritize electricity access expansions over, expanding access to clean cooking. And what might be at play here as well is there might be a visibility incentive where for politicians, it's easier for them. It might be more expensive to expand access to electricity, but people see these things with transmission lines and so forth than for people to see, a clean cooking stove in one household. So this might also play a role here. For the upper middle and high income countries, we again have that negative association with access to clean cooking, but it is positive and significant for the Energy Development Index. And we know that as countries develop and as people's standard of living improve, a household's consumption of energy increases as well. So it makes sense that naturally these policy focuses on overall energy development, it shifts to broader energy development instead of just focusing on access to clean cooking, access to electricity or renewables on its own, right? And for the clean cooking access problem here, it might just be a challenge of the last mile, right? Where in these countries, oftentimes the people lacking access to clean cooking are the ones living in rural areas, right? So it's now in these countries where they have more centralized governance, you need sort of those decentralized solutions to target access to clean cooking. So to conclude, we know that corruption plays an important role in helping economic growth to more effectively improve electricity access, clean cooking, and renewable energy consumption on aggregate in the region. But the income level does play a role in determining the strength and direction of this effect. But we do see that across all groups, growth reduces energy poverty in some capacity in environments with stronger corruption control. In terms of policy implications, in low-income countries, we need to ensure that renewables are not seen as these short-term solutions where countries just rely on it because they have low GDP per capita, and that's the only source available to them. But as soon as their GDP per capita improves, they reduce their reliance on it. So as much as we need to diversify our energy mixes, we cannot view renewables as just a short-term solution to a long-term problem of energy poverty. For low middle income countries, we need to prioritize, clean cooking in these governance and investment strategies to ensure that, it's not just favoring electricity projects. And that obviously, that favor risks widening the clean cooking gap. In upper middle and high income countries, we need to focus on the last mile challenge, where we need those decentralized energy solutions for clean cooking access. Two limitations, there are more, but two limitations that I wanted to highlight is that we're using the worldwide governance indicators, one aspect of it, and in these indicators, they do warn that these are used for regional trends. So we can't say anything about, specific country experiences. I cannot tell you that, South Africa has to do one thing and Nigeria has to do another thing. These indicators are used for regional trends mainly. And then obviously the affordability aspect of energy poverty is becoming increasingly important. In Sub-Saharan Africa, it is still very much a case of access, as we saw from the graphs. You're not going to care about how much electricity costs if you don't even have access. So having said that, we need to focus on access, but we need to start thinking about affordability as well. And with that, I thank you. We welcome any comments, questions, or suggestions.